Have you ever wondered what life was like in the Americas before European ships appeared on the horizon? Long before the first European settlers set foot on these shores, the American continents were home to millions of indigenous people living in complex and diverse societies that had developed over thousands of years. When Native American tribes were the sole inhabitants of these lands, managing their resources and living in harmony with the natural world around them. From the frozen tundra of Alaska to the dense rainforests of the Amazon, indigenous peoples had developed sophisticated ways of life perfectly adapted to their environments. In North America alone, scholars estimate that between 5 and 15 million people lived here before European contact. These weren't simple societies, as some might assume. The continent was home to hundreds of distinct cultures, each with its own language, customs, and ways of life. Think about this. There were more than 500 different languages spoken across North America, each representing a unique way of understanding and describing the world. Take the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, for example. This sophisticated political alliance of 5 native nations had developed a complex democratic system of government that some scholars believe influenced the United States Constitution. They lived in the northeastern woodlands, building longhouses and practicing advanced agricultural techniques that allowed them to sustain large populations. In the southwest, the Pueblo peoples had mastered desert agriculture, creating innovative irrigation systems and developing drought-resistant crops. They built remarkable multi-story adobe dwellings that still stand today, testament to their architectural expertise. Did you know that some of these pueblos, like Taoist Pueblo in New Mexico, have been continuously inhabited for over 1,000 years? The Plains tribes, such as the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Comanche, developed a way of life centered around the buffalo. Their intimate knowledge of the great herd's migration patterns shaped their seasonal movements, and they used every part of the animal, from meat for food to hides for clothing and shelter, bones for tools, and sinew for bowstrings. Along the Pacific Northwest coast, nations like the Tlingit, Haida, and Coast Salish developed sophisticated fishing techniques and boat-building skills. They created elaborate art forms, including totem poles that told family histories and clan relationships. Their societies were often stratified, with complex social hierarchies and elaborate gift-giving ceremonies known as potlatches. In what is now the American Southeast, the Mississippian culture built enormous earthen mounds and established large urban centers. Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, was larger than London in 1250 CE. These societies engaged in extensive trade networks that stretched from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. The Maya, Aztec, and Inca civilizations in Central and South America had developed even larger urban centers, with populations in the hundreds of thousands. They created sophisticated calendars, developed advanced mathematical systems, and built monumental architecture that still amazes us today. What many people don't realize is that Native Americans weren't simply living off the land, they were actively managing it. Through controlled burning, selective cultivation, and other techniques, they shaped the landscape in ways that increased its productivity while maintaining its ecological balance. The vast grasslands of the Great Plains, the open forests of the Northeast, and even the Amazon rainforest show evidence of this careful management. These societies had developed complex spiritual beliefs that emphasized humanity's connection to the natural world. Many native cultures saw themselves not as separate from nature, but as part of it with responsibilities to maintain balance in the world. This worldview led to sustainable practices that maintained healthy ecosystems for generations. Trade was another crucial aspect of pre-contact native life. Extensive trade networks crisscrossed the continents, allowing for the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies between different nations. Shells from the Gulf of Mexico have been found in the Great Lakes region, while copper from the Great Lakes made its way to the southeast. Native peoples had also developed sophisticated medical knowledge, understanding the healing properties of thousands of plants. Many of these traditional medicines would later be adopted by European settlers, and some are still used in modern pharmaceuticals today. It's important to understand that this wasn't a static world. Native societies were constantly evolving, adapting, and changing. They faced challenges, engaged in conflicts, made alliances, and developed new technologies and ways of living. They weren't frozen in time as they're sometimes portrayed, but were dynamic societies responding to changing circumstances just as all human societies do. This rich tapestry of cultures and civilizations would face unprecedented challenges with the arrival of European explorers and settlers. But understanding this pre-contact period is crucial for appreciating the full scope of American history and the sophisticated societies that existed here for thousands of years before European arrival. What would it have been like to walk through a bustling Native American town 1,000 years ago? To hear hundreds of different languages being spoken across the continent? To see the great herds of buffalo darkening the plains? While we can't travel back in time, understanding this period helps us appreciate the rich cultural heritage of the Americas and the sophisticated societies that first made these lands their home. Long before Columbus's famous voyage in 1492, brave Norse explorers had already reached North American shores. But who were these intrepid sailors, and what drove them to venture across the treacherous North Atlantic waters? Let's uncover the fascinating story of the Viking expeditions to North America. The Viking exploration of North America began around 1000 CE, primarily led by Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red. These journeys weren't random accidents. They were the result of systematic exploration that had already led the Vikings to establish settlements in Iceland and Greenland. What's particularly interesting is that Leif Erikson's discovery of North America came from following the route of a merchant named Bjarni Herjolfsson, who had previously spotted unknown lands while blown off course. The Norse sagas, particularly the Saga of Eric the Red and the Saga of the Greenlanders, provide our primary historical records of these expeditions. These texts describe several distinct regions encountered by the Vikings: Helluland, likely modern-day Baffin Island; Markland, probably Labrador; and Vinland, believed to be Newfoundland. But why did they give these specific names to these locations? Helluland was named for its flat stones, Hella in Old Norse, Markland for its forests, Mark meaning woodland, and Vinland for either its wild grapes or meadows. Vin could mean either wine or pasture. This naming convention shows how the Vikings categorized and remembered new territories based on their most distinctive features. The most significant archaeological evidence of Viking presence in North America was discovered in 1960 at Ålands Oaks Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada. This site revealed the remains of a Norse settlement, including 8 buildings constructed in the typical Norse style, with timber and sod construction. Various artifacts found at the site, such as a bronze cloak pin, iron boat rivets, and a soapstone spindle haul, provide undeniable proof of Norse presence in North America. But why didn't these settlements last? The Viking presence in North America was relatively brief, lasting only a few years. Several factors contributed to their departure. First, they faced hostile relations with the indigenous peoples, whom they called Skraelings. These encounters often turned violent, as documented in the sagas. Second, the settlements were far from their established bases in Greenland and Iceland, making supply lines difficult to maintain. Third, the small number of settlers, estimated at no more than 100, made it challenging to establish a permanent presence. The Viking expeditions to North America represented several significant firsts in human history. They were the first Europeans to cross the Atlantic Ocean, the first to make contact with indigenous North Americans, and the first to attempt European settlement in the Americas. Their navigation techniques, which relied on the sun, stars, and natural indicators like birds and waves, demonstrated remarkable maritime expertise. The Vikings' advanced shipbuilding technology played a crucial role in these expeditions. Their iconic longships were technological marvels of their time, featuring shallow drafts that allowed them to navigate both open seas and rivers, clinker-built hulls that provided flexibility in rough waters, and square sails that could harness the power of the wind effectively. But how did they navigate across such vast distances without modern instruments? The Vikings used several sophisticated navigation techniques. They employed a sun compass to determine direction, observed the behavior of whales and birds to locate land, and used sunstones, crystals that could locate the sun even on cloudy days, to maintain their bearing. They also relied heavily on oral traditions and detailed memorization of sailing routes, passing this knowledge from generation to generation. The impact of these Viking ventures extends beyond their immediate historical context. Their expeditions proved that transatlantic travel was possible, even if this knowledge wasn't widely disseminated in medieval Europe. The archaeological evidence of their presence has helped historians better understand Viking maritime capabilities and their interaction with indigenous peoples. What's particularly fascinating is how these Viking expeditions challenge our traditional understanding of European contact with the Americas. While Columbus's later voyage would lead to permanent European colonization, the Vikings' earlier contact shows that the isolation of the Americas from Europe wasn't as complete as once thought. The Viking ventures to North America represent a remarkable chapter in human exploration, demonstrating the capabilities of medieval seafarers and providing the first documented instance of transatlantic contact. While their settlements didn't endure, their achievement in reaching North America, establishing temporary settlements, and returning to tell the tale stands as a testament to human courage, ingenuity, and the eternal drive to explore unknown horizons. These Norse expeditions also serve as a reminder that history isn't always as straightforward as it might appear. The story of European contact with the Americas didn't begin with Columbus, but with these bold Viking voyagers who crossed the Atlantic centuries earlier, leaving behind both physical evidence and compelling sagas that continue to captivate us today. The year was 1492, and Europe was hungry for change. But why was this particular year so significant? What drove a relatively unknown Italian navigator to embark on one of history's most consequential voyages? Christopher Columbus, born in Genoa, Italy, had spent years trying to convince various European monarchs to fund his ambitious westward journey to reach Asia. His plan was based on a fundamental belief: if the Earth was indeed round, as many educated people of his time accepted, then sailing west should eventually lead to the eastern shores of Asia. While this basic premise was correct, Columbus had severely underestimated the Earth's circumference and was unaware of the two massive continents that lay between Europe and Asia. After facing multiple rejections, Columbus finally found support from Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain. But what motivated the Spanish monarchs to take this risk? Spain was in fierce competition with Portugal for new trade routes to Asia, particularly to access valuable spices, silk, and other exotic goods. The Portuguese had already established their dominance around Africa's coast, leaving Spain eager for an alternative route. The Spanish crown provided Columbus with 3 ships: the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. The largest of these, the Santa Maria, was only about 62 feet long, smaller than many modern yachts. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to cross an ocean in such a small vessel? The total crew numbered about 90 men, all of whom were taking an enormous risk by sailing into unknown waters. On August 3, 1492, Columbus and his crew departed from Palos, Spain. They'd first sailed to the Canary Islands, where they made repairs and took on fresh supplies. On September 6, they set out into the open Atlantic, entering waters that no European ship had ever knowingly sailed. The journey was far from smooth. As days turned into weeks with no sight of land, the crew became increasingly anxious. They'd faced numerous challenges: unpredictable weather, uncertain navigation, and dwindling supplies. Columbus maintained 2 logbooks, one with the true distance traveled and another showing a shorter distance to prevent the crew from realizing how far they had ventured from home. Signs of land began appearing in early October: floating vegetation, land birds, and changing weather patterns. These observations helped Columbus maintain crew morale, though they still had no idea what lay ahead. On October 12, 1492, at approximately 2 a.m., a sailor named Rodrigo de Triana aboard the Pinta spotted land. They had reached what Columbus would name San Salvador, an island in the present-day Bahamas. Columbus believed he had reached the East Indies, leading to his use of the term Indians for the indigenous people he encountered. This misconception would persist even after it became clear that he had found a previously unknown continent to Europeans. During this first voyage, Columbus also explored parts of Cuba and Hispaniola, modern-day Haiti and Dominican Republic. The expedition's return to Spain in March 1493 sparked an era of European exploration and colonization that would fundamentally reshape the world. Columbus made 3 more voyages to the Americas, each time expanding Spanish knowledge of the region. However, he died still believing he had reached Asia, never acknowledging that he had encountered entirely new continents. The impact of Columbus's journey was immediate and far-reaching. Spain quickly established colonies in the Caribbean, leading to the first sustained contact between Europe and the Americas since the Vikings' brief settlements. This initiated the Columbian Exchange, an unprecedented transfer of plants, animals, culture, technology, diseases, and people between the Old and New worlds. Consider the magnitude of change this single voyage initiated. Potatoes, tomatoes, and corn would transform European cuisine. Horses and cattle would reshape Native American societies. European diseases would devastate indigenous populations, and silver from the Americas would revolutionize the global economy. The world before 1492 and after would be dramatically different. The success of Columbus's first voyage also sparked a race for exploration and colonization among European powers. Spain's initial advantage would lead to its emergence as the first global empire, controlling vast territories in the Americas and establishing trade routes across the Pacific to Asia. However, it's crucial to understand that while Columbus's voyage represented a remarkable achievement in navigation and opened new chapters in global history, it also initiated centuries of conflict, colonization, and profound changes for the indigenous peoples of the Americas. The journey that began with 3 small ships would set in motion events that continue to influence our world today. What started as a miscalculated attempt to reach Asia became one of history's most significant voyages of exploration. Columbus's journey in 1492 marked the beginning of sustained contact between Europe and the Americas, leading to exchanges that would transform both worlds. While he never achieved his original goal of finding a western route to Asia, Columbus's voyage opened the door to a new era in human history, connecting previously separate worlds and initiating changes that would reshape the global landscape forever. The story of colonial America begins with a series of brave, desperate, and sometimes tragic attempts to establish permanent European settlements in the New World. Following Columbus's voyages, the race to colonize North America became an intense competition among European powers. But what drove these early settlers to leave everything they knew behind? What challenges did they face? And how did their arrival forever change the landscape of North America? Let's start with Jamestown, established in 1607, which holds the distinction of being the first permanent English settlement in North America. The Virginia Company of London, a joint stock company, funded this venture with the primary goal of finding gold and establishing profitable trade routes. The initial group of 104 settlers arrived aboard 3 ships, the Susan Constant, Godspeed, and Discovery. However, they were woefully unprepared for what awaited them. The location chosen for Jamestown proved problematic from the start. The settlers built their colony on a peninsula along the James River, but the low-lying land was swampy, filled with mosquitoes, and had brackish water that was unsafe to drink. During the first year, disease, starvation, and conflicts with the local Powhatan Indians led to the death of more than half the colonists. This period became known as the Starving Time. The colony's survival hung by a thread until 2 crucial developments occurred. First, John Smith emerged as a capable leader, establishing the practical policy that he who does not work shall not eat. Second, John Rolfe introduced a new strain of tobacco in 1610 that would become Virginia's economic salvation. This cash crop transformed the colony's fortunes and established the foundation for the southern plantation economy. Meanwhile, a different story was unfolding in New England. In 1620, the Mayflower departed Plymouth, England, carrying 102 passengers, a mix of religious separatists, later known as Pilgrims, and other settlers. After a grueling 66-day journey across the Atlantic, they landed at Plymouth Rock in present-day Massachusetts. But why did they leave England in the first place? The Pilgrims were seeking religious freedom, having faced persecution in England for their desire to purify the Church of England. However, like their Jamestown counterparts, they were ill-prepared for the harsh realities of the New World. During their first winter, nearly half of the original settlers died from exposure, scurvy, and other diseases. The Plymouth colony's survival was aided significantly by the Native Americans, particularly Squanto, a member of the Pawtuxet tribe who had previously been enslaved by English traders but had managed to return home. Squanto taught the settlers crucial survival skills, including how to cultivate corn, extract sap from maple trees, catch fish, and avoid poisonous plants. This cooperation culminated in the first Thanksgiving celebration in 1621. As these initial settlements took root, they established distinct characteristics that would influence American development for centuries to come. Jamestown's focus on profitable agriculture and its introduction of slavery in 1619 set patterns that would define the southern colonies. Meanwhile, Plymouth's emphasis on religious freedom, community cooperation, and self-governance through the Mayflower Compact would shape New England's development. The success of these early settlements encouraged further colonization. By 1733, 13 distinct English colonies had been established along the Atlantic coast. Each developed its own character based on geography, economy, and the motivations of its settlers. The New England colonies focused on shipbuilding, fishing, and trade. The middle colonies became known as the breadbasket due to their agricultural production. The southern colonies developed plantation economies based on cash crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo. However, this colonial dawn came at a devastating cost to Native American populations. The arrival of Europeans brought diseases against which Native Americans had no immunity. Estimates suggest that up to 90% of the Native American population died from diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza within a century of first contact. Additionally, as more settlers arrived, conflicts over land became increasingly common, leading to a series of wars and forced relocations of Native American tribes. The colonial period also saw the beginning of forced African migration to North America. The first documented Africans arrived in Jamestown in 1619, initially as indentured servants. However, by the end of the 17th century, a system of chattel slavery had become firmly established, particularly in the southern colonies, creating a legacy that would haunt American society for centuries to come. The colonial dawn represents more than just the establishment of European settlements in North America. It marks the beginning of a complex process that would eventually lead to the creation of a new nation. The period saw the development of unique American institutions, the mixing of diverse cultures, and the establishment of economic and social patterns that would influence American society for generations to come. What began with a handful of struggling settlements along the Atlantic coast would eventually grow into 13 distinct colonies, each with its own character, but united by common experiences and challenges. These early colonial experiences, the struggles for survival, the interactions with Native Americans, the development of self-governance, and the establishment of diverse economies would all play crucial roles in shaping the future United States of America. The story of the Mayflower Covenant, also known as the Mayflower Compact, represents one of the most significant moments in early American history. But why was this document so crucial, and how did it shape the future of what would become the United States? Let's begin with the basics. In 1620, 102 passengers aboard the Mayflower set sail for the New World. These weren't just any settlers, they were a mix of religious separatists, whom we now call the Pilgrims, and other colonists, whom the Pilgrims called strangers. The Pilgrims had originally planned to settle in Virginia, where they had legal permission to establish a colony. However, harsh weather conditions forced the ship off course, leading them to anchor near present-day Cape Cod, Massachusetts. This unexpected change in location created a serious legal and practical problem. Since they were outside the jurisdiction of Virginia, their original charter had no authority in this new territory. Without a legal framework for governance, there was a real risk of chaos and discord among the passengers. Some of the strangers began suggesting they could do as they pleased since no official rules applied to them. Can you imagine the challenge of maintaining order among 102 people in a completely new land without any established rules? The Mayflower Compact emerged as a solution to this potential crisis. On November 11, 1620, while still aboard the Mayflower in Provincetown Harbor, 41 adult male passengers gathered to create and sign this revolutionary document. The compact was essentially a social contract, a written agreement to form a civil body politic and to submit to the laws and regulations that would be established for the good of the colony. The actual text of the Mayflower Compact was surprisingly brief, but its implications were enormous. The document began by declaring loyalty to King James, as the settlers were still British subjects. However, it then proceeded to establish something unprecedented, a self-governing community based on majority rule and consensual lawmaking. The signers agreed to combine ourselves together into a civil body politic and to create and abide by just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices. What made this document truly revolutionary? For the first time in the New World, a group of common people created their own government through mutual consent. This was a radical departure from the European tradition where governmental authority flowed from the divine right of kings. Instead, the compact established the principle that political authority could emerge from the consent of the governed, a concept that would later become fundamental to American democracy. The practical implementation of the Mayflower Compact began immediately. The settlers elected John Carver as their first governor, and they established a system of laws and decision-making processes. This framework helped them survive the brutal first winter and establish Plymouth Colony, which would become one of the most successful early English settlements in North America. The influence of the Mayflower Compact extended far beyond Plymouth Colony. It set important precedents that would shape American governance for centuries to come. The concept of self-government through written constitutions, the idea of majority rule, and the principle of consensual government all found their first New World expression in this document. These principles would later influence the Articles of Confederation, state constitutions, and ultimately the United States Constitution. Consider this: without the Mayflower Compact, how might the development of American democracy have been different? The document demonstrated that common people could create and maintain their own government, a radical idea in the 17th century. It showed that written constitutions could effectively organize political communities, and it established the precedent of creating new governments through mutual agreement. The compact also reflected the Pilgrims' religious beliefs while establishing a secular government. While the document acknowledged God and the Christian faith, it created a civil government rather than a religious one. This balance between religious conviction and civil authority would become another characteristic of American governance. The legacy of the Mayflower Compact continues to influence modern governance. Its principles of self-government, consensual rulemaking, and written constitutions have become fundamental to democratic systems worldwide. The document serves as a reminder that effective government can emerge from the mutual agreement of ordinary people working together for the common good. The Mayflower Compact's significance extends beyond its immediate historical context. It represents the first step in a long journey toward democratic self-governance in America. From this simple agreement among 41 men on a ship in 1620, a tradition of constitutional government emerged that would eventually lead to the world's oldest continuing democracy. As we reflect on this pivotal document, we might ask ourselves, how did this relatively simple agreement between a small group of settlers help shape the democratic principles we take for granted today? The answer lies in its revolutionary assertion that legitimate political authority can arise from the consent of the governed, a principle that continues to resonate in modern democratic societies around the world. The story of colonial expansion in early America is one filled with tremendous challenges, perseverance, and the fundamental struggle to build functioning societies in an unfamiliar land. Have you ever wondered what it was really like for those early settlers as they ventured beyond the initial settlements? Let's explore the remarkable period of colonial growth and its accompanying difficulties. Following the establishment of Plymouth Colony, the pace of colonial expansion accelerated dramatically. Between 1630 and 1642, the Great Migration brought more than 20,000 Puritans to New England, catalyzing the development of new settlements beyond the original Plymouth Colony. But why did they spread out, and what challenges did they face? The primary driver of colonial expansion was simple: the need for land. As more immigrants arrived, the original settlements became crowded and agricultural land grew scarce. This led to what historians call the outward push, where groups of settlers moved inland, establishing new towns and communities. However, this expansion wasn't as simple as just claiming new territory. One of the most significant challenges these expanding colonies faced was the development of sustainable agricultural practices. The New England soil was rocky and less fertile than what the settlers had known in England. They had to learn new farming techniques, often adapting Native American methods of cultivation. The settlers discovered the importance of fish fertilizer, crop rotation, and the cultivation of native crops like corn, squash, and beans. But how did they manage to feed growing populations with such challenging conditions? The answer lay in diversification. Colonies couldn't rely solely on agriculture. They developed multiple economic activities, including fishing, shipbuilding, and trade. The abundance of timber in New England proved particularly valuable, leading to the establishment of numerous sawmills and the beginning of a robust shipbuilding industry. These economic adaptations were crucial for survival, but they also created new challenges. Social organization presented another significant hurdle. As colonies spread out, maintaining order and governance became increasingly complex. How do you establish law and order in scattered settlements? The solution came in the form of the township system, where each new settlement was organized around a central meeting house and common green. This system became the backbone of New England's social and political organization. The relationship with Native American tribes became increasingly complicated during this period of expansion. While some early settlements had benefited from peaceful relations and trade with native peoples, the push into new territories led to increasing tensions and conflicts. The competition for land and resources often resulted in misunderstandings, broken agreements, and eventually violent confrontations. Religious tensions also emerged as colonies grew. Although many settlements were founded on religious principles, maintaining religious uniformity became increasingly difficult as populations grew and diversified. The case of Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson illustrates this challenge perfectly. Both were banished from Massachusetts Bay Colony for challenging religious orthodoxy, leading to the establishment of Rhode Island as a haven for religious freedom. The challenge of communication and coordination between settlements was another significant growing pain. In an era without rapid transportation or communication systems, how did these scattered communities maintain connections and organize mutual defense? They developed networks of messengers, established regular meeting schedules for colonial leaders, and created mutual defense pacts. Disease and health issues continued to plague growing settlements. The lack of medical knowledge and proper sanitation in crowded colonial towns led to frequent outbreaks of diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza. How did they cope? They developed quarantine systems, relied heavily on folk medicine, and gradually built up immunity to some diseases. The labor shortage was another persistent problem. The work of building new settlements required many hands, but there were never enough people to do all the necessary tasks. This led to the development of various labor systems, including indentured servitude, which brought thousands of Europeans to the colonies in exchange for passage and the promise of land or freedom after a period of service. Environmental challenges were constant companions to colonial expansion. Harsh winters, unpredictable weather patterns, and unfamiliar wildlife posed serious threats to survival. The settlers had to learn to build better insulated homes, store food more effectively, and adapt their European clothing and customs to American conditions. The process of establishing new settlements required careful planning and coordination. Each new town needed to be surveyed, lots assigned, common areas designated, and basic infrastructure created. This included building meeting houses, establishing mills, creating roads, and constructing defensive structures. How did they manage such complex organizational tasks with limited resources? The answer lay in community cooperation. Colonial expansion succeeded largely because of the strong sense of community and shared purpose among settlers. They developed systems of mutual aid and community labor, where all members of a settlement would contribute to major projects like barn raising or road building. These growing pains shaped the character of colonial America and established patterns that would influence American development for centuries to come. The challenges faced during this period of expansion fostered innovation, adaptation, and the development of uniquely American solutions to unprecedented problems. The lessons learned during this crucial period about community organization, religious tolerance, economic diversification, and adaptation to local conditions would prove invaluable as the colonies continued to grow and eventually formed the foundation of a new nation. The French and Indian War, spanning from 1754 to 1763, stands as one of the most pivotal conflicts in North American history. But why was this war so significant, and how did it reshape the entire continent? Let's explore this fascinating period that would ultimately set the stage for the American Revolution. The conflict began with a fundamental question: who would control the vast territory of North America? The British colonies hugged the eastern seaboard, while French settlements stretched along the St. Lawrence River and down through the Mississippi Valley. Between these territories lay the Ohio River Valley, a region both powers desperately wanted to control. Have you ever wondered why this particular area was so important? The Ohio River Valley represented not just land, but a gateway to the continent's interior, rich in fur trading opportunities and fertile soil for farming. The term French and Indian War itself can be somewhat misleading. While it was indeed a war between the French and British, both sides allied with various Native American nations. The French had long-established trading relationships with many tribes, including the Algonquin, Abenaki, and Huron peoples. The British, meanwhile, maintained alliances with the powerful Iroquois Confederacy. These Native American alliances would prove crucial throughout the conflict. The spark that ignited this powder keg came in 1754 when a young George Washington, then serving as a British colonial officer, led an expedition into the Ohio Territory. His encounter with French forces near present-day Pittsburgh resulted in a skirmish that would escalate into a global conflict. Did you know that this was Washington's first military command, and that his actions here would help shape his future military career? The war unfolded across multiple fronts, with several key battles determining its outcome. The British initially struggled, suffering numerous defeats. The French, despite having fewer colonists in North America, proved formidable opponents thanks to their superior knowledge of the terrain and strong Native American alliances. However, the tide began to turn in 1758 when William Pitt, the British Prime Minister, committed more resources to the American theater. One of the war's most decisive moments came in 1759 with the Battle of Quebec. British forces under General James Wolfe faced French troops led by the Marquis de Montcalm on the Plains of Abraham. Both commanders would die in this battle, but the British victory effectively sealed the fate of New France. Can you imagine the impact this single battle had on the future of North America? The war's conclusion in 1763 brought dramatic changes to the continent's political landscape. The Treaty of Paris forced France to surrender nearly all its North American territories to Britain. Spain, which had entered the war on France's side, ceded Florida to Britain but received the Louisiana Territory from France as compensation. This massive transfer of territory made Britain the dominant European power in North America. However, victory came at a considerable cost. Britain had accumulated enormous war debts, leading to increased taxation of the American colonies, a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. The British government also issued the Proclamation of 1763, prohibiting colonial settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains to avoid further conflicts with Native Americans. This restriction angered many colonists who had hoped to expand westward. Would you believe that this attempt to maintain peace would actually contribute to growing colonial discontent? The war's aftermath significantly impacted Native American nations as well. With the French no longer present as a counterbalance to British power, many tribes lost their ability to play European powers against each other for their own benefit. The British proved less interested in maintaining the kind of trading relationships and diplomatic ties the French had cultivated with native peoples. The conflict also provided military experience to many colonial leaders who would later serve in the American Revolution. Besides Washington, men like Israel Putnam, Philip Schuyler, and Charles Lee gained valuable battlefield experience during this war. This military knowledge would prove crucial in the upcoming struggle for independence. The French and Indian War represents more than just a colonial conflict. It was a turning point that reshaped North American politics, economics, and social relations. It ended French colonial ambitions in North America, established British dominance, and ironically laid the groundwork for American independence. The war's expenses led to new British taxation policies in the colonies, while the removal of the French threat allowed colonists to focus more on their relationships with Britain itself. The conflict also marked the first time the American colonies fought alongside British forces in a major war, fostering a sense of unity and shared identity among the colonies. However, this unity would soon be tested as Britain's post-war policies created new tensions with its American subjects. How different might North America look today if the French had prevailed in this crucial conflict? Understanding the French and Indian War is essential for comprehending the complex chain of events that led to American independence and the formation of modern North America. Its effects rippled through time, influencing not just the American Revolution, but also the development of Canada, Native American relations, and the eventual westward expansion of the United States. Have you ever been forced to pay for something without having any say in the matter? This is exactly what the American colonies experienced in the period following the French and Indian War, leading to one of the most famous phrases in American history: no taxation without representation. Let's begin by understanding why Britain started imposing these taxes. The French and Indian War had left Britain with a massive war debt of £130 million. The British government, led by King George IV and Parliament, believed that since they had protected the colonies during the war, the colonies should help pay for these expenses. This seemed logical to the British, but there was one significant problem. The colonies had no representatives in Parliament. The taxation story begins in 1764 with the Sugar Act, which was actually a revision of an earlier law called the Molasses Act. The Sugar Act reduced the tax on molasses but enforced it more strictly. This affected colonial merchants who relied on the molasses trade for rum production, a significant colonial industry. While this act caused some grumbling, it was just the beginning of Britain's new approach to colonial taxation. The real controversy erupted in 1765 with the Stamp Act. This law required colonists to purchase and place special stamps on all legal documents, newspapers, pamphlets, and even playing cards. Think about how this would affect daily life. Every contract, every newspaper, every deck of cards needed this special stamp. The cost was unavoidable and touched virtually every colonial transaction. What made these taxes particularly offensive to the colonists? The answer lies in British constitutional tradition. British citizens had long held the right to be taxed only by representatives they elected. The colonists, as British subjects, believed they deserved the same rights. However, they had no elected representatives in Parliament. This was different from previous trade regulations, which the colonies had generally accepted as part of Britain's right to regulate commerce within its empire. The colonial response was swift and unified. Boycotts of British goods were organized, and groups like the Sons of Liberty formed to protest these measures. The Stamp Act Congress, meeting in New York in 1765, marked the first time colonies formally united to oppose British policy. They issued a declaration asserting their rights as British subjects and declaring that only their own colonial assemblies could levy taxes. The British response to these protests reveals the fundamental misunderstanding between the two sides. Parliament insisted it had the right to tax the colonies in all cases whatsoever, claiming the colonies were virtually represented, just as many British citizens who couldn't vote were represented. The colonists rejected this argument, pointing out that British citizens without votes at least lived in constituencies that did vote, while the colonies had no constituencies at all. When Parliament repealed the Stamp Act in 1766, it simultaneously passed the Declaratory Act, asserting its right to legislate for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. This would prove to be a crucial mistake, as it set the stage for future conflicts. The British government simply couldn't understand why the colonies objected to helping pay for their own defense and administration. The tension escalated with the Townshend Acts of 1767, which imposed new duties on tea, glass, paint, and other imported goods. The British thought these would be more acceptable since they were external taxes on trade rather than internal taxes like the Stamp Act. However, the colonies maintained their position. Any tax imposed by Parliament without colonial representation was unconstitutional. The colonial resistance to these taxes took various forms. Beyond boycotts, colonists began producing their own goods to reduce dependence on British imports. Women played a crucial role through the Daughters of Liberty, who organized spinning bees to produce homespun cloth as an alternative to British textiles. Merchants signed non-importation agreements, and newspapers published the names of those who violated the boycotts. The Tea Act of 1773 would prove to be the breaking point. Although it actually lowered the price of tea, it gave the British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in the colonies. This threatened colonial merchants and seemed to confirm colonial fears about Parliament's power to control their economy. The result was the Boston Tea Party, where colonists dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. The taxation issue reveals a deeper conflict about the nature of representation and authority in the British Empire. The colonies had developed their own understanding of their rights as British subjects, while Parliament clung to older ideas about imperial authority. Neither side could fully comprehend the other's position, leading to an escalating cycle of action and reaction. The legacy of taxation without representation extends far beyond the American Revolution. It established a fundamental principle of democratic governance. Those who pay taxes should have a voice in how those taxes are levied and spent. This principle continues to influence political movements and governmental structures around the world today. The slogan, "No taxation without representation," remains powerful because it encapsulates a basic human desire for fairness and self-determination. It reminds us that legitimate government authority must be based on the consent of the governed, a principle that would be enshrined in the American Constitution and influence democratic movements worldwide. Have you ever wondered what could drive ordinary citizens to destroy valuable cargo worth millions in today's money? The Boston Tea Party of December 16, 1773, stands as one of the most significant acts of colonial resistance against British authority, but what really happened on that cold winter night? The events leading to the Boston Tea Party were rooted in a complex web of taxation and colonial frustration. In 1773, the British Parliament passed the Tea Act, which essentially gave the British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in the American colonies. While this actually made tea cheaper for the colonists, they saw through the scheme. The real issue wasn't about the price of tea, it was about the principle of taxation without representation. The Tea Act allowed the struggling British East India Company to bypass colonial merchants and sell directly to American consumers through specially selected consignees. This meant that while tea prices would decrease, the hated tea tax remained, and colonial merchants would lose their businesses. The colonists understood that accepting this arrangement would acknowledge Parliament's right to tax them without their consent. As ships carrying East India Company tea arrived in colonial ports, most cities successfully turned them away. But in Boston, Governor Thomas Hutchinson refused to let 3 ships, the Dartmouth, Eleanor, and Beaver, leave without unloading their cargo. The ships remained anchored in Boston Harbor, creating a standoff that would last several weeks. The colonists held numerous town meetings at the Old South Meeting House to decide what to do about the tea. On December 16, the final meeting drew over 5,000 people, so many that the crowd spilled into the streets. When it became clear that Governor Hutchinson wouldn't back down, Samuel Adams declared, "This meeting can do nothing more to save the country." This seemingly simple statement was actually a secret signal. That evening, approximately 116 men, many of them members of the Sons of Liberty, disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians. Why did they choose Native American disguises? The costume choice served both practical and symbolic purposes. It concealed their identities while also representing American liberty in opposition to British control. The group marched to Griffin's Wharf, where the 3 ships were docked. Over the course of 3 hours, they systematically destroyed 342 chests of tea, dumping approximately 92,000 pounds, roughly 45 tons, of tea into Boston Harbor. The tea would be worth nearly $1.7 million in today's currency. What's particularly interesting about this act of rebellion is how orderly it was. The participants were careful to destroy only the tea, no other cargo was touched, no ships were damaged, and no one was harmed. That even swept the ship's decks clean afterward and quietly dispersed. One participant even replaced a padlock he had broken during the raid. The response from Britain was swift and severe. Parliament passed a series of punitive laws known as the Coercive Acts, called the Intolerable Acts by the colonists. These included closing Boston Harbor until the destroyed tea was paid for, revoking the Charter of Massachusetts, allowing British officials accused of crimes to be tried in Britain, requiring colonists to quarter, house and feed British soldiers. Rather than subduing the colonies, these harsh measures united them in opposition to British authority. The other colonies rallied to Boston's aid, sending supplies and support. This solidarity led to the First Continental Congress in 1774, where delegates from 12 colonies met to coordinate their response to British actions. The Boston Tea Party's significance extends beyond the immediate destruction of tea. It demonstrated that colonists were willing to take direct action to protect their rights. It showed that peaceful protests and petitions had given way to more radical measures. Most importantly, it revealed that the conflict between Britain and its colonies had reached a point where compromise would be increasingly difficult. The event also established a powerful American tradition of protest against unjust authority. When we examine modern protests and acts of civil disobedience, we can often trace their philosophical roots back to this pivotal moment in 1773. The Boston Tea Party raises important questions about the nature of protest and resistance. When is destruction of property justified in pursuit of political goals? How do we balance respect for law and authority with the need to oppose unjust policies? These questions were relevant in 1773, and they remain relevant today. The participants themselves couldn't have known they were helping to spark a revolution. Many were ordinary merchants, craftsmen, and laborers who simply believed they were standing up for their rights as British subjects. Yet their actions set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to American independence. The Boston Tea Party reminds us that significant historical changes often begin with seemingly simple acts of protest. It demonstrates how local events can have global consequences and how the actions of ordinary citizens can shape the course of history. What began as a dispute over tea became a catalyst for revolution, fundamentally changing the relationship between Britain and its American colonies. The First Continental Congress stands as a pivotal moment in American history, marking the first time colonial leaders formally united to address their grievances against British rule. Let's explore how this watershed event unfolded and why it matters so much in the story of American independence. In September 1774, 56 delegates from 12 colonies, Georgia being the only colony absent, gathered at Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia. But what drove these men to take such an unprecedented step? The answer lies in the aftermath of the Boston Tea Party and Britain's subsequent punitive response, the Coercive Acts, which the colonists called the Intolerable Acts. These harsh measures included closing Boston Harbor until the destroyed tea was paid for, restricting Massachusetts' self-governance, allowing British officials accused of crimes to be tried in Britain rather than the colonies, and requiring colonists to house British soldiers. The severity of these acts didn't just affect Massachusetts. They sent shockwaves through all the colonies. Have you ever wondered how a local incident in Boston became the catalyst for united colonial action? The delegates who attended weren't revolutionaries, at least not yet. Most were prominent leaders in their communities, lawyers, merchants, and landowners. Names we now revere as founding fathers were present: John Adams and Samuel Adams from Massachusetts, Patrick Henry and George Washington from Virginia, and John Jay from New York. These men didn't come to Philadelphia seeking independence. Instead, they sought to restore their rights as British subjects and repair the relationship with Great Britain. The Congress lasted from September 5 to October 26, 1774, during which time the delegates engaged in intense debates about how to respond to British actions. What emerged from these discussions? Several key documents and decisions that would shape the path to revolution. 1. The Declaration and Resolves. This document outlined colonial rights and grievances, asserting that colonists were entitled to the same rights as British citizens, including the right to life, liberty, property, and to be taxed only by their own elected representatives. 2. The Association. Perhaps the most significant achievement, this agreement created a colony-wide boycott of British goods. It was the first coordinated American action against British policy and included mechanisms for enforcement through local committees. 3. The Petition to King George III. A final attempt at reconciliation, this document respectfully asked the king to address colonial grievances and restore harmony. The delegates still considered themselves loyal subjects, hoping the king would intervene on their behalf. 4. Letters to British people and other colonies. The Congress appealed to the British public for support and wrote to other British colonies explaining their position. The significance of these actions cannot be overstated. For the first time, the colonies acted as a unified body, creating what historian John Adams called a continental constitution. The Congress established important precedents for intercolonial cooperation and created an administrative network through local committees that would prove crucial during the coming revolution. But what made the First Continental Congress truly remarkable was its ability to bridge significant regional differences. Consider how challenging it was to unite colonies with different economic interests, religious beliefs, and social structures. The northern colonies, with their emphasis on trade and manufacturing, had different concerns than the agricultural South, yet they found common ground in their opposition to British policy. The Congress also demonstrated remarkable restraint. While some delegates, like Patrick Henry, pushed for more radical action, the majority favored a measured approach. They weren't ready to break with Britain, not yet. Instead, they chose economic pressure through boycotts as their primary weapon. The impact of the Congress extended beyond its immediate actions. It created a framework for colonial cooperation that would prove essential when the Second Continental Congress convened in May 1775, after the battles of Lexington and Concord. The committees established to enforce the association became de facto local governments, providing administrative experience that would prove invaluable during the Revolution. The First Continental Congress also marked a crucial step in American political development. It demonstrated that the colonies could work together effectively despite their differences, setting a precedent for federal cooperation that would later influence the creation of the United States government. As the delegates departed Philadelphia in October 1774, they agreed to reconvene in May 1775 if their grievances weren't addressed. They couldn't have known then that by the time they met again, the first shots of the American Revolution would have already been fired at Lexington and Concord. The First Continental Congress represents a crucial transition point in American history, a moment when colonial leaders still sought reconciliation with Britain while simultaneously laying the groundwork for potential independence. It showed how shared grievances could unite diverse colonies and how economic pressure could be used as a political weapon. Most importantly, it demonstrated that the colonies could act as one when their rights and liberties were threatened. Have you ever wondered about the exact moment that sparked the American Revolution? What single event transformed simmering tensions into an all-out war for independence? The answer lies in what became known as the Shot Heard Round the World, a pivotal moment that occurred on April 19, 1775, during the battles of Lexington and Concord. Let's begin by understanding why these battles took place. By early 1775, relations between the American colonies and Great Britain had reached a breaking point. The British government had imposed numerous taxes and restrictions on the colonies, leading to growing resentment and resistance. Colonial militias, known as Minutemen because they could be ready to fight at a minute's notice, had been stockpiling weapons and ammunition in preparation for potential conflict. British General Thomas Gage, who served as both the military governor of Massachusetts and commander-in-chief of British forces in North America, received intelligence about these weapons caches. He particularly knew about a significant storage of military supplies in Concord, Massachusetts. On the night of April 18, 1775, Gage ordered approximately 700 British regulars to march to Concord and seize these supplies. However, the colonists were prepared. Thanks to an elaborate warning system established by the Patriots, including the famous midnight ride of Paul Revere and other riders, word of the British advance spread quickly through the countryside. As Revere and others galloped from town to town, they warned that the regulars are coming, not the British are coming, as commonly misquoted, since the colonists still considered themselves British at this time. The first confrontation occurred at dawn on Lexington Green. Around 70 Minutemen, led by Captain John Parker, faced off against the British forces. No one knows who fired first. That crucial detail remains one of history's mysteries. But someone did fire, and that single shot triggered a brief but deadly skirmish. When the smoke cleared, 8 colonists lay dead and 10 were wounded. This was the first bloodshed in what would become the American Revolution. The British troops then continued their march to Concord. By this time, most of the military supplies had been moved or hidden thanks to the advance warning. At Concord's North Bridge, the British encountered more resistance. Here, about 400 colonial militiamen forced 3 companies of British soldiers to retreat. During this engagement, the colonists fired the famous "shot heard round the world," a phrase later immortalized by Ralph Waldo Emerson in his Concord hymn. But the real trial for the British was yet to come. As they began their return march to Boston, they faced an increasingly hostile countryside. Thousands of militiamen from surrounding towns had arrived and taken up positions along the route. What followed was a running battle, with colonists firing from behind trees, walls, and buildings at the exposed British column. The British suffered heavy casualties during this fighting retreat, and only the arrival of reinforcements prevented a complete disaster. The significance of these battles cannot be overstated. They transformed political disagreement into open warfare. The colonists had stood up to the mighty British Army and proved they could fight. News of the battles spread rapidly throughout the colonies, galvanizing support for the revolutionary cause. Within days, thousands of militiamen from across New England converged on Boston, beginning the siege that would last until March 1776. The battles also had important psychological effects. They showed that colonial militia could effectively fight against professional British soldiers. They demonstrated that the colonies were willing to resist British authority with force. And perhaps most importantly, they proved that there was no turning back. The American Revolution had begun. The term "shot heard round the world" has become symbolic of how a seemingly small event can have massive historical consequences. The battles of Lexington and Concord marked the point of no return in American-British relations. After this, reconciliation became virtually impossible and independence became inevitable. These events also established patterns that would continue throughout the war. The British Army's superiority in open-field battles was offset by the colonists' ability to use terrain and guerrilla tactics effectively. The colonial militia's ability to rapidly mobilize and respond to threats would prove crucial in the coming conflict. The legacy of Lexington and Concord continues to resonate today. The sites of these battles are now preserved as part of Minuteman National Historical Park, where visitors can walk the same ground where American independence began. The annual Patriots' Day celebration in Massachusetts commemorates these events, and the phrase "the shot heard round the world" has entered common usage as a metaphor for any event that triggers major historical changes. What started as a British military expedition to seize colonial weapons became the catalyst for 8 years of warfare and the birth of a new nation. The shot heard round the world continues to echo through history, reminding us how a single moment can change the course of human events forever. Have you ever wondered what gave 56 men the courage to sign a document that could have led to their execution for treason? The Declaration of Independence, adopted by the Continental Congress on July 4, 1776, stands as one of the most significant documents in human history. Let's explore how this remarkable text came to be and why its words still resonate today. Following the outbreak of fighting at Lexington and Concord in April 1775, the relationship between the American colonies and Great Britain had deteriorated beyond repair. While some colonists still hoped for reconciliation, a growing number believed that complete independence was the only path forward. But how did we get from armed conflict to an official Declaration of Independence? In June 1776, the Continental Congress appointed a committee of 5 to draft a formal declaration. This committee consisted of Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. Though all were accomplished men, they chose Jefferson as the primary author. Why Jefferson? His reputation as a skilled writer and his deep understanding of Enlightenment principles made him the ideal candidate. Jefferson didn't write the Declaration in a vacuum. He drew heavily from existing documents and philosophical ideas. The Virginia Declaration of Rights, written by George Mason, provided inspiration. So did the writings of John Locke, particularly his concepts of natural rights and the social contract theory. These influences helped shape what would become America's founding document. The actual writing process took place over 17 days in June 1776. Jefferson worked in a rented room in Philadelphia using a portable writing desk he had designed himself. The initial draft went through several revisions within the Committee of Five before being presented to Congress on June 28, 1776. What many people don't realize is that the Declaration went through significant changes during congressional debate. Over the course of 3 days, Congress made 86 changes to Jefferson's draft. The most substantial deletion was a lengthy passage condemning King George III for supporting the slave trade. This removal, made to appease Southern delegates, would have long-lasting implications for the nation's future struggle with slavery. The structure of the Declaration follows a logical progression that makes its argument compelling. It begins with the famous preamble, establishing the philosophical foundation for independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. This section introduces the concept of natural rights and the purpose of government. The document then presents a long list of grievances against King George III. These weren't random complaints, but carefully chosen examples demonstrating a pattern of abuse. Each grievance supported the central argument that the king had broken his responsibility to protect the rights of his subjects. Did you know there were 27 specific grievances listed? The Declaration's conclusion is equally powerful, formally declaring the colony's independence and pledging the signers lives, fortunes, and sacred honor to the cause. This wasn't empty rhetoric. The signers knew they were committing treason under British law, punishable by death. The actual signing of the Declaration occurred primarily on August 2, 1776, though some delegates signed later. Contrary to popular belief, not all signatures were added on July 4th. In fact, only John Hancock and Charles Thomson signed on that day. Hancock's famous large signature was intentionally bold. He wanted King George to be able to read it without his spectacles. The impact of the Declaration extended far beyond America's shores. Its principles influenced revolutionary movements worldwide, from the French Revolution to modern independence movements. The document's emphasis on human rights and self-determination established a new standard for political thought. What's particularly fascinating is how the Declaration's meaning has evolved over time. While initially focused on colonial independence, its principles of equality and natural rights have been invoked by various groups fighting for their own rights, from women's suffrage to civil rights movements. The physical document itself tells an interesting story. Written on parchment with iron gall ink, it has faded significantly over the years. Today, it's preserved in a specially designed case at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., filled with argon gas and protected from light damage. The Declaration's influence on American government didn't end with independence. Its principles were later incorporated into the Constitution and Bill of Rights, forming the foundation of American democracy. The concept that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed remains a cornerstone of American political thought. Understanding the Declaration of Independence helps us comprehend not just America's founding, but the ongoing struggle for human rights and dignity worldwide. Its words continue to inspire people fighting for freedom and justice, making it not just a historical document, but a living testament to human aspirations for liberty. The story of the Declaration reminds us that transformative change often requires both bold vision and careful deliberation. Those 56 signers, representing different colonies and interests, came together to create something larger than themselves. Their courage in declaring independence, knowing the risks, demonstrates how powerful ideas can overcome fear and unite people for a greater cause. The winter of 1777 to 1778 marks one of the most challenging yet transformative periods in American military history. Have you ever wondered how an army could survive when everything seemed to be working against it? The story of Valley Forge provides that answer, showcasing not just survival, but the forging of a truly professional American army. After the Continental Army's defeats at Brandywine and Germantown and the British occupation of Philadelphia, General George Washington made the crucial decision to establish winter quarters at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Located approximately 20 miles northwest of Philadelphia, this location was strategically chosen because it allowed the Army to maintain pressure on British forces while protecting the Continental Congress, which had relocated to York, Pennsylvania. The numbers tell a stark story. Washington marched into Valley Forge with approximately 12,000 troops on December 19, 1777. By February 1778, this number had dwindled to about 6,000 effective soldiers. Why such a dramatic decrease? The answer lies in the harsh conditions these patriots faced. The winter of 1777 to 1778 wasn't actually the coldest on record, but the combination of challenges made it devastating. Contrary to popular belief, the primary killer at Valley Forge wasn't the cold, it was disease. Typhoid, typhus, dysentery, and pneumonia spread rapidly through the camp. The lack of proper sanitation and crowded conditions created perfect breeding grounds for these illnesses. By the end of the encampment, an estimated 2,000 soldiers had died from disease and exposure. But what made the situation truly dire was the severe lack of supplies. The Continental Congress had failed to establish an effective supply system, and the Army's quartermaster department was in disarray. Soldiers lacked basic necessities, proper clothing, blankets, food, and medicine. Many troops marched into Valley Forge wearing rags, some without shoes, leaving bloody footprints in the snow. Food shortages were so severe that the period became known as the Winter of the Rolling Stomach, a reference to the hunger pains that plagued the troops. What's particularly interesting about Valley Forge is that it wasn't just a story of suffering, it was a turning point in military effectiveness. This is where Baron Friedrich von Steuben enters the story. Arriving in February 1778, this Prussian military officer would transform the Continental Army from a collection of amateur militias into a professional fighting force. Von Steuben created the Army's first standardized training program. He wrote a manual of arms, later published as Regulations for the Order and Discipline of the Troops of the United States, which standardized military drills and tactics. He started with a model company of 100 men, who then trained others, creating a multiplier effect throughout the Army. The Baron's training included everything from proper handling of muskets to battlefield formations. He introduced a systematic method of camp sanitation, which helped reduce disease. Perhaps most importantly, he taught the troops to use the bayonet effectively, a skill that would prove crucial in later battles. The support of women at Valley Forge often goes unrecognized, but it was vital. Approximately 400 women, many of them soldiers' wives, served as nurses, laundresses, and cooks. Martha Washington herself arrived in February 1778, helping to organize relief efforts and boost morale. The local population played a crucial role too. Despite the risk of British retaliation, many Pennsylvania farmers provided food and supplies to the Continental Army. The Pennsylvania government eventually implemented a mandatory procurement system requiring farmers to sell supplies to the Army at set prices. By June 1778, when the Continental Army marched out of Valley Forge, it was a transformed force. The proof came quickly at the Battle of Monmouth, where the Americans held their ground against British regulars in one of the largest battles of the war. The training at Valley Forge had paid off. The significance of Valley Forge extends beyond military history. It became a powerful symbol of American perseverance and determination. The suffering endured there demonstrated the price of liberty and the depth of commitment to the revolutionary cause. It showed that the American Army, despite its hardships, could match and eventually exceed the professional standards of European forces. What emerged from those 6 months was more than just a better trained army. Valley Forge represented a crucial test of American resolve and leadership. Washington's decision to remain with his troops rather than seek comfortable quarters elsewhere strengthened his bond with his men and cemented his reputation as a leader who shared in his soldiers' hardships. The Valley Forge experience also highlighted serious problems in American governance that needed addressing. The supply crisis demonstrated the weaknesses of the Continental Congress and the Articles of Confederation, contributing to later arguments for a stronger federal government under the Constitution. Valley Forge stands as a testament to human endurance and the power of determination in the face of overwhelming odds. It reminds us that some of history's most important victories don't happen on battlefields, but in the quiet moments of perseverance, when giving up would have been the easier choice. The French alliance stands as one of the most pivotal moments in the American Revolution, transforming what began as a colonial rebellion into an international conflict. But how did this crucial partnership come to be, and what made France decide to support the American cause? The story begins even before the harsh winter at Valley Forge, when the Continental Congress sent Benjamin Franklin to France in late 1776. Franklin's mission was clear but challenging: secure French support for the American Revolution. Why France? The answer lies in the complex web of European politics and France's bitter rivalry with Great Britain following their defeat in the Seven Years' War, 1756 to 1763. Franklin's presence in Paris proved to be a masterstroke of diplomacy. The renowned scientist and statesman became an instant celebrity in French society. His simple American style, combined with his wit and intelligence, captivated the French public and court alike. But what many don't realize is that French support had actually begun even before formal alliance, with secret shipments of supplies and weapons orchestrated through a fake trading company called Roderigue Hortalez et Cie. The turning point came after the American victory at Saratoga in October 1777. This battle demonstrated that the Continental Army could defeat British regular forces in a major engagement. Have you ever wondered what convinces a major power to support an uprising? The answer often lies in proving your capability, and Saratoga did exactly that. France now saw an opportunity not just to support a revolution, but to strike a significant blow against their British rivals. On February 6, 1778, two crucial treaties were signed. The first was the Treaty of Amity and Commerce, which established formal trade relations. The second, the Treaty of Alliance, committed France to America's cause. This marked the first time the United States had entered into a formal alliance with a foreign power. What made this alliance particularly significant was France's commitment to fight until American independence was achieved. The practical effects of the French alliance were immediate and substantial. France provided essential military supplies, troops, and naval support. The French Navy, in particular, played a crucial role in neutralizing British naval superiority. Consider this: before the alliance, Britain could move troops and supplies freely along the American coast. After the French fleet arrived, British naval operations became significantly more complicated. Financial support was equally important. France provided loans and outright gifts that helped stabilize the American economy and maintain the Continental Army. The alliance also brought military expertise. The Marquis de Lafayette, who had already been serving with distinction, was joined by other French officers who helped train and professionalize American forces. But the alliance wasn't just about military and financial support. It provided something equally valuable: legitimacy. Other European powers began to view the American cause more seriously. Spain, though not formally allying with the United States, entered the war against Britain in 1779. The Netherlands followed suit in 1780. The American Revolution had evolved into a global conflict. The French alliance also had significant diplomatic implications. It forced Britain to divide its military resources across multiple theaters of war, weakening their ability to suppress the American rebellion. British ships and soldiers now had to defend interests in the Caribbean, Mediterranean, and India, not just in North America. The culmination of the French alliance came at the Battle of Yorktown in 1781. This decisive victory, which effectively ended the Revolutionary War, was only possible through French cooperation. French ships blocked British naval relief, while French troops fought alongside American forces on land. Have you ever considered how different the outcome might have been without this coordinated effort? The cost to France was enormous. The financial strain of supporting the American Revolution contributed to France's own fiscal crisis, which would later play a role in the French Revolution. Yet for America, the alliance proved invaluable. It provided the support needed at a crucial moment when the revolution might otherwise have faltered. The French alliance also established a precedent for American foreign policy. Though the formal military alliance would end with the 1783 Treaty of Paris, it demonstrated the importance of international partnerships and diplomacy. This lesson would influence American foreign relations for centuries to come. Looking back, the French alliance represents more than just a military partnership. It symbolizes how international cooperation can change the course of history. It shows how shared interests, even between nations with different systems of government, can forge powerful bonds. Most importantly, it demonstrates how support at crucial moments can determine the success or failure of a cause. The legacy of the French alliance continues to influence American-French relations to this day. The Statue of Liberty, a gift from France in 1886, stands as a lasting symbol of this historic friendship. When examining modern international alliances and partnerships, we can trace many of their fundamental principles back to this crucial period in American history. The Battle of Yorktown, fought in 1781, stands as one of the most decisive moments in American history, effectively ending the American Revolutionary War. But how did this crucial victory unfold, and what made it the final nail in the coffin of British colonial rule in America? Following the French alliance established in 1778, the combined American and French forces gained a significant advantage in both military strength and strategic capabilities. The French Navy, led by Admiral François Joseph Paul de Grasse, played a pivotal role in blocking the Chesapeake Bay, preventing British ships from either escaping or providing reinforcements to their trapped army. General George Washington and French General Rochambeau orchestrated a brilliant deception campaign, initially making the British believe they were planning to attack New York City. This strategic misdirection allowed the Allied forces to secretly march south toward Virginia, where British General Charles Cornwallis had established his army at Yorktown. Why was Yorktown chosen by Cornwallis? The British general believed the peninsula's location would provide a secure base for naval operations, but this assumption would prove to be his undoing. The Siege of Yorktown began on September 28, 1781. The combined Franco-American force numbered around 17,000 troops, while Cornwallis commanded approximately 8,000 British soldiers. The Allies employed siege warfare tactics, methodically constructing parallel trenches that allowed them to move closer to the British fortifications while maintaining protection from enemy fire. The first parallel was completed by October 9, and the Allies began bombarding the British positions with artillery fire. A key moment came on October 14, when American and French forces captured two British redoubts, small fortifications, designated as Redoubt 9 and Redoubt 10. The American forces, led by Alexander Hamilton, took Redoubt 10, while the French captured Redoubt 9. This success allowed the Allies to complete their second parallel, bringing their artillery within close range of the British defenses. The British situation grew increasingly desperate. Cornwallis attempted to evacuate his army across the York River to Gloucester Point on October 16, but a storm scattered the boats and forced them to return. British supplies were running low, and casualties mounted from the continuous bombardment. Disease spread through the ranks, further weakening the British position. On October 17, 1781, after just 3 weeks of siege, Cornwallis sent out a drummer and an officer waving a white flag to initiate surrender negotiations. The official surrender ceremony took place on October 19, where British troops marched out to lay down their arms. Tradition holds that the British band played "The World Turned Upside Down," though historical evidence for this is uncertain. What is certain is that this surrender represented a complete reversal of fortunes in the war. The numbers tell the story of the British defeat: 7,087 British soldiers, 840 sailors, and 214 artillery pieces were surrendered to the Allied forces. The British suffered approximately 156 killed, 326 wounded, and 70 missing during the siege. The Franco-American forces lost about 88 killed and 301 wounded. The impact of Yorktown reverberated across the Atlantic. When news reached London in late November, the British government faced a crisis. Prime Minister Lord North reportedly exclaimed, "Oh God! It is all over." The defeat at Yorktown effectively ended British political support for the war in America. Although some fighting continued for another 2 years, no major campaigns were launched. The victory at Yorktown led directly to peace negotiations. The preliminary Articles of Peace were signed in Paris in November 1782, and the formal Treaty of Paris was signed on September 3, 1783, officially recognizing American independence. But what made Yorktown such a perfect storm of circumstances? Several factors contributed to this decisive victory. The crucial French naval support that trapped Cornwallis, the successful deception that allowed Washington to move his army south undetected, the effective siege tactics employed by the Allies, and the coordination between American and French forces. The victory demonstrated how far the Continental Army had come since its early defeats, now capable of conducting complex military operations alongside a major European power. The Battle of Yorktown also highlighted the importance of international alliances in the American Revolution. Without French support, both naval and land forces, the victory might not have been possible. The French fleet's control of the Chesapeake Bay was particularly crucial, as it prevented British naval forces from evacuating or reinforcing Cornwallis's army. Yorktown's legacy extends beyond military history. It proved that the American experiment in self-governance could succeed against the world's most powerful empire. The victory gave credibility to the American cause and demonstrated that the United States could stand as an independent nation on the world stage. As we reflect on Yorktown, we must consider how different might history have been if Cornwallis had chosen a different location. What if the French fleet hadn't arrived in time? The victory at Yorktown wasn't just a military triumph, it was the culmination of years of sacrifice, determination, and the forging of crucial alliances that would shape the future of a nation. The Yorktown victory remains a testament to the power of combined arms warfare, strategic planning, and international cooperation. It marked not just the end of the American Revolution, but the birth of a new nation that would go on to become one of the world's leading powers. Have you ever wondered how the United States government came to be structured as it is today? The story begins in 1787, when a crucial meeting would shape the future of a young nation. The Constitutional Convention, also known as the Philadelphia Convention, stands as one of the most significant events in American history, transforming a loose confederation of states into a unified nation with a strong federal government. Following the victory at Yorktown and the end of the Revolutionary War, the United States faced numerous challenges under the Articles of Confederation. This first attempt at governing the nation proved inadequate. States acted like independent countries, printing their own money and imposing tariffs on their neighbors. The federal government couldn't collect taxes, regulate trade, or enforce laws. These problems led to economic chaos and civil unrest, exemplified by events like Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts. But what exactly happened during this historic convention? From May to September 1787, 55 delegates from 12 states, Rhode Island refused to attend, gathered at the Pennsylvania State House in Philadelphia. These men, now known as the Founding Fathers, included George Washington, James Madison, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, and other prominent leaders of the time. Each brought their own ideas and concerns about how the new government should function. The original purpose of the convention was simply to revise the Articles of Confederation. However, it quickly became apparent that a completely new system of government was needed. James Madison, often called the father of the Constitution, arrived with a clear vision. His Virginia plan proposed a strong national government with three distinct branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. This basic framework would eventually become the foundation of the U.S. Constitution. The delegates faced numerous challenges and disagreements. How would states be represented in Congress? The larger states supported the Virginia Plan, which called for representation based on population. Smaller states feared being overwhelmed and proposed the New Jersey Plan, advocating equal representation for all states regardless of size. The solution? The Great Compromise, which created a bicameral legislature, the House of Representatives based on population, and the Senate, equal representation for all states. Another major issue was slavery. How could a nation founded on liberty justify the enslavement of human beings? Northern and southern states clashed over this question. The resulting 3/5 compromise determined that slaves would count as 3/5 of a person for purposes of representation and taxation. While this compromise allowed the Constitution to move forward, it left the fundamental issue of slavery unresolved, setting the stage for future conflict. The delegates also grappled with questions about presidential power. Should there be one executive or multiple? How would the president be elected? The Electoral College system emerged as a compromise between those who wanted direct popular election and those who preferred selection by Congress. The president would serve a 4-year term and could be removed through impeachment if necessary. The convention established crucial concepts that continue to shape American democracy. The separation of powers among 3 branches of government prevents any single branch from becoming too powerful. The system of checks and balances allows each branch to limit the powers of the others. Federalism divides power between national and state governments, addressing concerns about both central authority and local autonomy. After 4 months of intense debate and careful drafting, the Constitution was completed on September 17, 1787. However, the work wasn't finished. The document needed ratification by 9 states to take effect. This led to another intense debate between Federalists, who supported the Constitution, and Anti-Federalists, who opposed it. The Anti-Federalists argued that the Constitution gave too much power to the federal government and lacked protections for individual rights. To address these concerns, the Federalists promised to add a Bill of Rights once the Constitution was ratified. This promise proved crucial in securing support from key states. The Bill of Rights, consisting of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, would protect fundamental individual liberties such as freedom of speech, religion, and due process of law. The Constitution was ultimately ratified in 1788, and the new government began operating in 1789. The document created at the Constitutional Convention has proven remarkably durable, serving as the foundation of American government for over 230 years. While it has been amended 27 times, its basic framework remains intact. The Constitutional Convention reminds us that democracy requires compromise and cooperation. The delegates had different interests and beliefs, but they worked together to create a system of government that could unite a diverse nation. Their achievement continues to influence democratic movements worldwide and serves as a model for constitutional government. What challenges do you think the Founding Fathers would be most surprised to see us still grappling with today? How might they view the ways in which their carefully crafted system has evolved over time? The Constitutional Convention wasn't just about creating a government structure, it was about establishing principles and processes that would allow a nation to grow, adapt, and hopefully thrive for generations to come. The Federalist debates represent one of the most crucial periods in American political history, spanning from 1787 to 1789. Following the Constitutional Convention, the newly proposed Constitution faced a challenging journey toward ratification, sparking intense discussions and debates across all 13 states. But what exactly made these debates so significant, and why do they continue to influence American politics today? The heart of the Federalist debates centered on a fundamental question: should the United States adopt the new Constitution? This seemingly simple question divided the nation into 2 distinct camps: the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists, led by prominent figures like Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, strongly supported the Constitution's ratification. On the opposite side, the Anti-Federalists, including Patrick Henry, George Mason, and Richard Henry Lee, voiced serious concerns about the proposed government structure. The Federalists argued that a stronger central government was essential for the nation's survival. They pointed to the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, under which the country had been operating since 1781. Remember the Shays' Rebellion? This uprising in Massachusetts had demonstrated how powerless the national government was in maintaining order and protecting property rights. The Federalists emphasized that a more robust federal government could better handle national defense, regulate commerce between states, and establish a unified currency system. One of the most significant contributions to these debates was the publication of the Federalist Papers. These 85 essays, written under the pseudonym Publius, appeared in New York newspapers between 1787 and 1788. Hamilton, Madison, and Jay carefully explained and defended every aspect of the proposed Constitution. They addressed concerns about potential tyranny, explained the system of checks and balances, and outlined how federalism would protect both state and national interests. Have you ever wondered why these essays remain relevant today? They continue to serve as crucial references for understanding the Constitution's original intent and principles. The Anti-Federalists raised valid concerns that deserve our attention. They worried about the concentration of power in a central government, fearing it might lead to tyranny similar to what they had experienced under British rule. They'd argued that the Constitution didn't adequately protect individual rights and that the federal government would eventually overshadow state governments. Their most pressing demand was the inclusion of a Bill of Rights, which would explicitly protect individual liberties. The debates weren't confined to philosophical discussions in newspapers and meeting halls. Each state held its own ratification convention, where delegates engaged in thorough debates about the Constitution's merits and drawbacks. Delaware became the first state to ratify on December 7, 1787, but the process wasn't always smooth. Several key states, including New York and Virginia, faced fierce opposition. The Virginia Ratification Convention particularly highlights the intensity of these debates. Patrick Henry delivered passionate speeches against ratification, warning that the new government would destroy state sovereignty. James Madison countered these arguments, explaining how the federal system would preserve state powers while creating a more effective national government. Virginia's eventual ratification, though narrow 89-79, proved crucial for the Constitution's success. In New York, the situation was equally dramatic. The state's ratification convention began with anti-federalists holding a solid majority. The Federalist Papers, primarily written to influence New York's voters, played a vital role in shifting public opinion. Alexander Hamilton's persuasive arguments, combined with the pressure of other states' ratifications, eventually led to New York's approval, though by a slim margin of 30-27. The Federalist debates also revealed the importance of compromise in American politics. The Federalists' promise to add a Bill of Rights after ratification proved crucial in winning over moderate anti-federalists. This compromise demonstrated that even fundamental disagreements could be resolved through reasoned debate and mutual concession. By June 21, 1788, New Hampshire became the 9th state to ratify, officially establishing the Constitution as the law of the land. However, the debates didn't end there. North Carolina and Rhode Island initially rejected the Constitution, only joining the Union after the Bill of Rights was proposed. The legacy of the Federalist debates extends far beyond their immediate outcome. They established important precedents for political discourse in America, demonstrating how opposing sides could engage in substantive debates about fundamental issues. The arguments raised during these debates continue to resonate in contemporary discussions about federal power, states' rights, and individual liberties. Moreover, the debates produced lasting documents that help us understand the Constitution's meaning and purpose. The Federalist Papers, in particular, remain essential reading for scholars, judges, and anyone interested in constitutional interpretation. They provide invaluable insights into the founders' intentions and the principles underlying American government. The Federalist debates remind us that the American system of government wasn't created through unanimous agreement, but through thoughtful debate, reasonable compromise, and a willingness to address legitimate concerns. The process demonstrated that different views could be reconciled through rational discussion and mutual respect, setting a valuable example for future generations of Americans. The story of George Washington's presidency marks a pivotal moment in American history as it set the foundation for how future presidents would lead the nation. Let's explore how the first president of the United States shaped the role and established enduring precedents that continue to influence American governance today. When George Washington took office in 1789, he faced an unprecedented challenge. How does one lead a position that had never existed before? The Constitution provided basic guidelines, but the practical aspects of the presidency remained undefined. This is where Washington's true genius emerged, in creating traditions and precedents that would stand the test of time. One of Washington's first crucial decisions was determining how to be addressed. Some suggested grand titles like His Highness or His Elected Majesty, but Washington chose the simple Mr. President. This choice reflected his democratic values and established an important precedent of presidential humility. Have you ever wondered why we still use this straightforward title today? It's because of Washington's deliberate choice to avoid monarchical associations. The formation of the first presidential cabinet was another significant innovation. The Constitution mentioned executive departments but didn't specify how they should operate. Washington created a cabinet of advisors, including Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury, Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State, Henry Knox as Secretary of War, and Edmund Randolph as Attorney General. This structure has remained largely unchanged, though the number of cabinet positions has expanded with the nation's growth. Financial stability was a pressing concern during Washington's presidency. The new nation faced significant debt from the Revolutionary War, and different states had varying economic situations. Alexander Hamilton, as Treasury Secretary, proposed a bold financial plan that included assuming state debts at the federal level, creating a national bank, establishing a federal mint, implementing tariffs and taxes to generate revenue. These measures, while controversial at the time, established the foundation of American financial systems that persist today. Foreign policy presented another crucial challenge. Washington had to navigate complicated relationships with Britain and France, especially during the French Revolution. His response was the proclamation of neutrality in 1793, declaring America's intention to remain neutral in European conflicts. This decision established the precedent of American neutrality in foreign wars, which guided U.S. foreign policy for over a century. Did you know that Washington's farewell address, though never delivered as a speech, became one of the most important documents in American political history? In it, he warned against permanent alliances with foreign nations and the dangers of political parties, establishing guiding principles that influenced American policy for generations. Washington's presidency also faced domestic challenges. The Whiskey Rebellion of 1794 tested federal authority when farmers in western Pennsylvania protested a tax on whiskey. Washington's response, personally leading troops to quell the rebellion, demonstrated federal power while establishing the precedent that laws passed by Congress must be enforced. The president's relationship with Congress set important patterns. Washington regularly consulted with the Senate, but established that the president wasn't required to follow their advice. He used the veto power sparingly, setting a precedent for its judicious use. His interpretation of executive privilege, refusing to share certain documents with Congress, continues to influence presidential-congressional relations. Washington's decision to step down after 2 terms established perhaps his most famous precedent. Though he could have served longer, possibly even for life, he chose to retire, setting a 2-term tradition that lasted until Franklin D. Roosevelt. This voluntary limitation of power demonstrated his commitment to Republican principles and prevented the presidency from becoming too similar to a monarchy. Other lasting precedents from Washington's administration include the practice of presidential proclamations, the role of the president as head of state and head of government, the concept of executive privilege, the president's role as commander-in-chief, the tradition of inaugural addresses. Washington's presidency also established important ceremonial aspects of the office. He balanced being accessible to the public while maintaining the dignity of the position. His weekly public receptions and formal levees created traditions of presidential hospitality that continue in modified forms today. The success of Washington's presidency wasn't just in what he did, but in what he chose not to do. He refused to abuse his power, declined to create a powerful executive branch that might threaten liberty, and consistently put the nation's interests above his own. These choices established the presidency as a position of public trust rather than personal power. As we reflect on Washington's presidency, we can see how his decisions continue to influence the American presidency today. From the title Mr. President to the structure of the cabinet, from foreign policy precedents to the relationship with Congress, Washington's choices created a framework for presidential leadership that has served the nation for over 2 centuries. The importance of Washington's presidency cannot be overstated. In establishing these crucial precedents, he transformed the presidency from a theoretical position outlined in the Constitution into a practical and effective office of leadership. His success in this endeavor is perhaps best measured by how many of his precedents and principles continue to guide presidential behavior in the modern era. Have you ever wondered why Americans hold their individual rights so dear? The story of the Bill of Rights is not just about a document, it's about a promise made to every American citizen, a guarantee that their fundamental freedoms would be protected from government overreach. Let's explore how these crucial first 10 amendments to the Constitution came to be and why they remain vital today. The journey of the Bill of Rights began during the ratification debates of the Constitution in 1787 to 1788. Many states expressed serious concerns about ratifying the Constitution without explicit protections for individual rights. Remember how the Anti-Federalists, led by figures like George Mason and Patrick Henry, argued that the Constitution gave too much power to the federal government. They weren't alone in their concerns. The absence of a Bill of Rights became the main stumbling block to the Constitution's ratification. Several states, including influential ones like Virginia and New York, agreed to ratify only with the understanding that a Bill of Rights would be added immediately. This political compromise proved crucial for the nation's founding, but what exactly did people want to protect? James Madison, who initially opposed a Bill of Rights, became its primary architect and champion. Why did he change his mind? Two factors proved decisive. First, his promise to his constituents in Virginia to support amendments protecting individual rights, and second, his correspondence with Thomas Jefferson, who convinced him of their importance. Madison reviewed hundreds of proposed amendments submitted by the states and distilled them into a manageable list. On June 8, 1789, Madison presented his proposals to Congress. From an initial list of 17 amendments, Congress debated and refined them into 12 proposals. Here's where it gets interesting. Only 10 of these were ratified by the states, becoming what we now know as the Bill of Rights. The process took over 2 years, with final ratification occurring on December 15, 1791. Let's examine these fundamental rights one by one. The First Amendment established 5 crucial freedoms: religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. Why these particular rights? They reflected the colonists' experience with British suppression of dissent and religious persecution. The Second Amendment protected the right to bear arms, connecting it to the concept of a well-regulated militia. This reflected both the recent experience of revolution and the practical needs of a frontier nation. The Third Amendment, prohibiting the forced quartering of soldiers in private homes, addressed a specific grievance from colonial times when British troops were routinely housed in American homes. The Fourth Amendment protected against unreasonable searches and seizures, requiring warrants based on probable cause. This responded directly to the hated writs of assistance that British authorities had used to conduct arbitrary searches. The Fifth Amendment established crucial legal protections: grand jury indictment for serious crimes, protection against double jeopardy, the right against self-incrimination, due process of law, and just compensation for property taken for public use. The Sixth Amendment guaranteed rights in criminal trials, including speedy and public trials, impartial juries, information about charges, confrontation of witnesses, and legal counsel. The Seventh Amendment preserved the right to jury trials in civil cases. The Eighth Amendment prohibited excessive bail, excessive fines, and cruel and unusual punishment. The Ninth Amendment clarified that the enumeration of certain rights doesn't deny others retained by the people. The Tenth Amendment reserved powers not delegated to the federal government to the states or the people, addressing fears about federal overreach. But what about those 2 amendments that weren't ratified? One dealt with congressional representation and was never ratified. The other, concerning congressional pay raises, was actually ratified in 1992 as the 27th Amendment, showing how the amendment process can span centuries. The Bill of Rights represented a revolutionary concept: the idea that government power should be limited and individual rights protected by law. Unlike the English Bill of Rights of 1689, which mainly protected Parliament from the monarch, the American Bill of Rights protected individual citizens from government power. The impact of these amendments has been profound and far-reaching. Through judicial interpretation, many of these rights have been extended to apply to state governments through the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause, a process known as incorporation. Consider how these rights affect daily life. The freedom to worship as you choose, speak your mind, read a free press, be secure in your home, receive fair treatment in court, all these traced back to the Bill of Rights. These protections have inspired similar rights declarations worldwide and continue to evolve through court interpretations. The Bill of Rights remains a living document, its principles constantly tested and reinterpreted in light of new challenges and technologies. How do Fourth Amendment protections apply to digital privacy? How does the First Amendment relate to social media? These questions show how the fundamental principles established in 1791 continue to shape our national dialogue about rights and freedoms. The story of the Bill of Rights reminds us that protecting individual liberties requires constant vigilance and engagement. It's not just a historical document, it's a continuing promise that defines what it means to be American. Have you ever wondered why Washington, D.C. became the capital of the United States? The story of how this unique city came to be is a fascinating tale of political compromise, careful planning, and early American ingenuity. Let's explore how a stretch of swampland along the Potomac River transformed into one of the world's most important capital cities. In the early days of the United States, the nation's capital wasn't fixed in one location. The Continental Congress met in several different cities, including Philadelphia, Baltimore, and New York. After the Constitution was ratified, New York City served as the first official capital, but this was always meant to be temporary. But why did the founders feel the need to create an entirely new city from scratch? The decision to establish a new capital city came from the Residence Act of 1790, which was part of a larger political compromise. Alexander Hamilton, representing the northern states, wanted the federal government to assume the state's Revolutionary War debts. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, representing Southern interests, opposed this plan. The compromise? The South would support Hamilton's debt plan in exchange for a Southern location for the new capital. The Residence Act granted President George Washington the authority to select a site for the federal district along the Potomac River. The location had to be between 100 square miles and 10 square miles, somewhere between Pennsylvania and Virginia. Why the Potomac? The river represented a symbolic meeting point between North and South, and Washington himself favored this location for its potential commercial and strategic importance. In 1791, Washington selected the exact location that would become the District of Columbia. The site included portions of Maryland and Virginia, though the Virginia portion would later be returned to the state in 1846. The new federal district was a diamond-shaped territory measuring exactly 100 square miles as specified in the Constitution. Pierre-Charles L'Enfant, a French engineer who had served in the Continental Army, was chosen to design the new city. His grand vision included wide avenues, public spaces, and a grid system intersected by diagonal streets, a design that remains largely intact today. The plan featured a prominent place for the Capitol building on Jenkins Hill, later called Capitol Hill, and a location for the President's house, now known as the White House. But building a capital city from scratch wasn't easy. What challenges did the early builders face? The land was largely swampland and forest. Workers had to contend with humid summers, harsh winters, and disease-carrying mosquitoes. Construction was slow, and funding was often scarce. Many questioned whether such an ambitious project could succeed. Despite these challenges, work continued. The cornerstone of the Capitol building was laid in 1793, and construction of the President's house began the same year. By 1800, the federal government was ready to move from Philadelphia to its new home, though the city was far from complete. When John Adams became the first president to occupy the President's house, it was still unfinished, and the Capitol building was only partially constructed. The early years of Washington, D.C. were hardly glamorous. The city was described by many as a muddy, unfinished work in progress. British diplomat Sir Augustus Foster called it a city of magnificent intentions. There were few paved streets, limited amenities, and a small population. During its first decade, the capital city had only about 8,000 residents. The War of 1812 brought a serious crisis to the young capital. British forces invaded the city in 1814, burning many government buildings, including the Capitol and the President's house. However, this destruction led to renewed determination to rebuild and improve the city. The rebuilt President's house was painted white to cover the burn marks, leading to its popular name, the White House. The establishment of Washington, D.C. as the national capital represented more than just the creation of a new city. It symbolized the permanence of the new nation and its commitment to democratic ideals. The city was designed to be worthy of a great republic, with classical architecture and carefully planned spaces for public gathering and governance. Today's Washington, DC has grown far beyond what its founders could have imagined. From those humble beginnings in swampland, it has become a major world capital, home to all three branches of the federal government, numerous museums and monuments, and over 700,000 residents. The city serves not only as the seat of American government, but also as a symbol of American democracy and power. The story of Washington, D.C.'s establishment reminds us that great achievements often require vision, compromise, and persistence. While the city's early years were marked by challenges and setbacks, the founders' determination to create a capital worthy of their new nation ultimately prevailed. As we look at Washington, D.C. today, we can see both the fulfillment of L'Enfant's grand vision and a living testament to the enduring strength of American democracy. Have you ever wondered how the United States managed to double its size in a single transaction? The Louisiana Purchase stands as one of the most significant land deals in history, fundamentally transforming a young nation and setting the stage for America's westward expansion. Let's explore this remarkable story that changed the course of American history. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson orchestrated what would become known as the Louisiana Purchase, acquiring approximately 828,000 square miles of land from France for $15 million, roughly 3 cents per acre. This massive territory stretched from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains and from the Gulf of Mexico to Canada. But what led to this extraordinary opportunity? The story begins with France's control of this vast territory. French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte initially had grand plans for a French empire in North America. However, several factors forced him to reconsider this ambition. France was facing mounting military expenses from its European campaigns, and a slave rebellion in Haiti had depleted French resources. Additionally, the prospect of war with Britain loomed large, making it difficult for France to defend and maintain its American territories. Jefferson's original goal was far more modest than acquiring the entire Louisiana territory. He primarily sought to secure American access to the port of New Orleans and ensure free navigation of the Mississippi River, which were crucial for American trade. The Mississippi River served as the primary transportation route for American farmers and merchants in the Western territories to get their goods to market. When Spain, which had previously controlled the territory, transferred it back to France in 1800, Americans grew concerned about their continued access to this vital waterway. Jefferson sent James Monroe and Robert Livingston to Paris with instructions to negotiate the purchase of New Orleans and a small strip of land for up to $10 million. To their surprise, they were offered much more than they had anticipated. Napoleon's minister, François Barbé-Marbois, proposed selling the entire Louisiana territory. The American negotiators, though lacking explicit authorization for such a massive purchase, recognized the extraordinary opportunity and agreed to the deal. The purchase raised several constitutional questions. Jefferson himself, a strict constructionist of the Constitution, initially worried about whether the president had the authority to acquire territory. However, the potential benefits outweighed his constitutional concerns, and he proceeded with the transaction. The Senate ratified the treaty on October 20, 1803, by a vote of 24-7. What did the United States gain from this historic purchase? The territory included the entire present-day states of Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska, along with parts of Minnesota, Louisiana, New Mexico, Texas, and the Dakotas. It also included most of what would become Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado. This acquisition effectively doubled the size of the United States and provided access to some of the continent's most fertile agricultural lands and valuable natural resources. The Louisiana Purchase had profound implications for American development. It secured American control of the Mississippi River and the port of New Orleans, crucial for trade and economic growth. It opened vast new territories for settlement and agriculture, leading to the creation of 15 new states. The purchase also strengthened American independence from European powers and set the stage for the concept of manifest destiny, the belief that American expansion across the continent was both inevitable and justified. However, the acquisition also raised important questions about the future of slavery in the new territories and the displacement of Native American tribes. The issue of whether new states would be slave or free would later contribute to sectional tensions leading up to the Civil War. Additionally, The expansion of American territory led to increased conflicts with Native American tribes who had lived in these lands for generations. The Lewis and Clark Expedition, 1804 to 1806, commissioned by Jefferson shortly after the purchase, became the first major exploration of the new territory. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark led their course of discovery up the Missouri River and across the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Ocean, documenting the geography, natural resources, and indigenous peoples of the region. Their expedition provided valuable information about the newly acquired territory and helped establish American claims to the Pacific Northwest. The Louisiana Purchase represents more than just a land deal. It was a pivotal moment that shaped the future of the United States. It demonstrated the young nation's ability to seize diplomatic opportunities, its commitment to expansion, and its emergence as a continental power. The purchase set in motion a series of events that would transform the United States from a coastal nation into a continental power, influencing everything from commerce and agriculture to politics and cultural development. The effects of this historic transaction continue to resonate today. The states formed from the Louisiana Territory remain vital parts of the American economy and culture, producing everything from agricultural products to energy resources. The purchase serves as a reminder of how single decisions can have far-reaching consequences that shape the course of history for generations to come. The War of 1812 stands as a pivotal moment in American history, often called the Second War of Independence. Let's explore why this conflict emerged and how it shaped the young United States of America. Have you ever wondered why Americans had to fight Britain again, just a few decades after gaining independence? The roots of this conflict stretched deep into the tensions between Britain and France. As these European powers engaged in their own battles, America found itself caught in the crossfire. British ships regularly stopped American vessels, searching them for British deserters and often forcing American sailors into British naval service, a practice called impressment. By 1812, more than 6,000 American sailors had been pressed into British service against their will. How would you feel if your fellow citizens were being kidnapped and forced to serve a foreign power? The British also angered Americans by supporting Native American tribes who resisted American expansion into the Northwest Territory, modern-day Midwest. The British provided weapons and encouragement to tribes led by Tecumseh, who formed a powerful confederation to resist American settlement. This alliance threatened American frontier settlements and fueled anti-British sentiment. President James Madison, who succeeded Thomas Jefferson, finally asked Congress for a declaration of war in June 1812. The vote was far from unanimous, with many New England states opposing the war due to their strong trading ties with Britain. This internal division would plague the American war effort throughout the conflict. The war began with American attempts to invade Canada, which was then a British colony. These invasions proved disastrous, with poorly trained American militia forces suffering several embarrassing defeats. The British, meanwhile, demonstrated their naval superiority by establishing a blockade of American ports, severely damaging the U.S. economy. However, the tide began to turn with several American naval victories. The U.S. Constitution, nicknamed Old Ironsides, became legendary after defeating several British warships. On the Great Lakes, Oliver Hazard Perry's victory at the Battle of Lake Erie in 1813 secured American control of that crucial waterway. His message to General William Henry Harrison became famous: "We have met the enemy and they are ours." The British escalated the conflict in 1814, following Napoleon's defeat in Europe. They launched major offensives, including the burning of Washington, D.C. The White House, Capitol, and other government buildings were set ablaze, a humiliating moment for the young nation. However, the Americans achieved a crucial victory when they prevented the British from capturing Baltimore, inspiring Francis Scott Key to write what would become the Star-Spangled Banner. The war's most famous battle actually occurred after the peace treaty was signed. At the Battle of New Orleans in January 1815, General Andrew Jackson led a diverse force of regular army troops, militia, free blacks, pirates, and Choctaw warriors to a stunning victory over veteran British forces. This battle, though militarily unnecessary, became a powerful symbol of American capability and unity. The War of 1812 ended with the Treaty of Ghent, signed in December 1814. While the treaty essentially returned things to their pre-war status quo ante bellum, the conflict had far-reaching effects on American society and politics. 1. It fostered a new sense of American nationalism and unity. 2. It established the United States as a serious military power. 3. It led to the development of a stronger national defense system. 4. It marked the end of the Federalist Party, which had opposed the war. 5. It spurred American industrial development as the British blockade had forced domestic manufacturing. 6. It contributed to the era of good feelings under President James Monroe. The war also significantly impacted Native American tribes. With the British no longer supporting them, many tribes were forced to sign treaties ceding their lands to the United States. This opened vast territories for American settlement and expansion. The conflict demonstrated both the weaknesses and strengths of American democracy. While the nation's military preparedness and political unity were initially lacking, the ability to adapt, improve, and ultimately succeed against a superior power proved the resilience of the American system. The War of 1812 marked America's true emergence as an independent nation. No longer could Britain or any other European power treat the United States as a former colony or second-rate power. The war helped establish American diplomatic and military credibility on the world stage, while also fostering a stronger sense of national identity at home. In the aftermath of the war, the United States entered a period of rapid growth and development. The country turned its attention westward, embarking on an era of territorial expansion and economic development that would define the next several decades of American history. The war had proven that the experiment in democracy launched by the American Revolution could survive and thrive, even in the face of the world's most powerful nation. The Monroe Doctrine, announced in 1823, stands as one of the most significant foreign policy declarations in American history. But what exactly made this policy so revolutionary, and why does it continue to influence international relations even today? Let's explore this pivotal moment in American diplomacy. Following the War of 1812, the United States emerged with a stronger sense of national identity and a desire to assert itself on the world stage. President James Monroe, serving his second term as the nation's fifth president, faced a world in transition. European powers, particularly Spain, were losing their grip on their American colonies, and new independent nations were emerging throughout Latin America. The catalyst for the Monroe Doctrine came from several concerning developments. Russia was expanding its interests along the Pacific coast of North America, while several European powers, united in the Holy Alliance, were considering helping Spain reclaim its lost colonies in Latin America. These events posed a direct threat to American interests and the newly independent Latin American nations. But what exactly did the Monroe Doctrine state? The policy contained four main principles. 1. The Western Hemisphere was now closed to further European colonization. 2. The United States would view any European intervention in the Americas as an unfriendly act. 3. The United States would not interfere with existing European colonies. 4. The United States would stay out of European affairs. What many people don't realize is that Secretary of State John Quincy Adams played a crucial role in formulating this policy. Adams, who would later become president himself, recognized that the United States needed to establish itself as the predominant power in the Western Hemisphere while avoiding unnecessary entanglements in European affairs. The timing of the doctrine was particularly significant. By 1823, most of Spain's American colonies had achieved independence. Countries like Mexico, Peru, and Gran Colombia, which later split into several nations, were vulnerable to European reconquest. The Monroe Doctrine effectively put European powers on notice that the United States would not tolerate such interventions. However, here's an interesting fact that often surprises people. When first announced, the Monroe Doctrine had little practical effect. Why? Because in 1823, the United States lacked the military power to enforce it. The British Royal Navy, ironically, did more to enforce the doctrine than American forces, as British interests aligned with keeping other European powers out of the Americas. The doctrine gained real teeth only as American power grew throughout the 19th century. It became particularly relevant during the 1860s, when France attempted to establish a puppet empire in Mexico. the 1895 Venezuelan boundary dispute with British Guiana, the Spanish-American War of 1898, the Roosevelt Corollary of 1904, which expanded the doctrine's scope. The Monroe Doctrine's influence extended far beyond its original context. It became the foundation for American foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere for nearly 2 centuries. During the Cold War, it was used to justify American intervention in Latin America to prevent the spread of communism. The doctrine has been invoked numerous times, from the Cuban Missile Crisis to modern-day diplomatic relations. But what were the long-term implications of the Monroe Doctrine? It established the United States as the dominant power in the Western Hemisphere, a position it maintains to this day. It also created a framework for American involvement in regional affairs that continues to influence foreign policy decisions. The doctrine also had significant implications for Latin American nations. While it protected them from European colonization, it also established a paternalistic relationship with the United States that some critics argue led to American imperialism in the region. This complex legacy continues to influence U.S.-Latin American relations. The Monroe Doctrine represents a crucial turning point in American diplomatic history. It marked the moment when the United States declared itself a power to be reckoned with on the world stage, even if it wouldn't have the military might to fully back up that declaration for several decades. Understanding the Monroe Doctrine is essential for comprehending subsequent American foreign policy decisions. From the concept of manifest destiny to the Roosevelt Corollary, from the good neighbor policy to the Cold War containment strategy, the principles established by Monroe and Adams have echoed through American history. Today, while the specific threats that prompted the Monroe Doctrine have long since passed, its basic principle that the United States has a special interest in the Western Hemisphere remains a cornerstone of American foreign policy. The doctrine has evolved and been reinterpreted by successive administrations, but its fundamental assertion of American leadership in the Americas continues to influence international relations. The Monroe Doctrine stands as a testament to how a single foreign policy declaration can shape international relations for generations. It marked America's emergence as a significant player in global affairs and established patterns of international behavior that would influence American foreign policy for centuries to come. In the mid-19th century, a powerful idea swept across the United States, one that would fundamentally shape the nation we know today. This idea was called manifest destiny. But what exactly was it, and why did it have such a profound impact on American history? Manifest destiny was the belief that American settlers were destined to expand across North America, spreading their values, culture, and democratic institutions from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. This concept emerged in the 1840s, coined by journalist John L. O'Sullivan in 1845, when he wrote about the manifest destiny of the United States to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our multiplying millions. But why did this idea gain such tremendous popularity? The answer lies in the unique combination of religious, political, and economic factors of the time. Many Americans believed they had a divine mission to spread what they saw as their superior way of life across the continent. This belief was deeply rooted in Protestant Christianity and the idea of American exceptionalism. Have you ever wondered how religious beliefs can shape national policy? This is a perfect example of that intersection. The economic motivations behind manifest destiny were equally compelling. The United States was experiencing rapid population growth, and many Americans sought new opportunities for farming and commerce. The promise of fertile land in the West attracted thousands of settlers. Remember the California Gold Rush of 1849? That's just one example of how economic opportunities drove Western expansion. The concept of manifest destiny led to several significant territorial acquisitions. 1. The annexation of Texas, 1845. After gaining independence from Mexico, Texas joined the United States as the 28th state. 2. The Oregon Territory, 1846. Through a treaty with Great Britain, the United States acquired the Oregon Territory, which included present-day Oregon, Washington, and parts of Idaho. 3. The Mexican Cession, 1848. Following the Mexican-American War, Mexico ceded a vast territory to the United States, including California and parts of several other future states. 4. The Gadsden Purchase, 1853. The United States purchased additional territory from Mexico, completing the current southern border of the continental United States. However, it's crucial to understand that Manifest Destiny wasn't without its controversies and consequences. The expansion often came at the expense of Native American tribes, who were forcibly displaced from their ancestral lands. The concept also contributed to tensions with Mexico, leading to the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848. Have you ever considered how the effects of these historical events still resonate in modern American society? The impact of Manifest Destiny on Native American populations was particularly severe. As American settlers moved westward, they encountered numerous indigenous nations who had lived on these lands for generations. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 had already set a precedent for forcing Native Americans from their territories, and Manifest Destiny accelerated this process. The concept essentially provided a moral justification for displacement and conquest. The territorial expansion also had significant political ramifications. One of the most contentious issues was whether new territories would be free or slave states. This question intensified sectional tensions between the North and South, contributing to the factors that would eventually lead to the Civil War. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the Compromise of 1850 were attempts to address these tensions, but they ultimately proved insufficient. Manifest Destiny also influenced American foreign policy well beyond the 19th century. The idea that the United States had a special role to play in spreading democracy and American values didn't end with continental expansion. Can you see how this concept might have influenced American foreign policy in the 20th and 21st centuries? The economic impact of this expansion was enormous. New territories meant new resources: gold in California, timber in Oregon, fertile farmland in the Great Plains. This expansion helped fuel America's transformation from an agricultural to an industrial power. The Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, physically united these new territories and facilitated economic growth. Transportation and communication networks expanded to connect these new territories. The Oregon Trail, the California Trail, and other migration routes became vital arteries for westward expansion. The Pony Express, though short-lived, symbolized the desire to connect the east and west coasts. These developments laid the groundwork for modern American infrastructure. Manifest Destiny also had a lasting impact on American culture and identity. The idea of the frontier and the self-reliant pioneer became powerful symbols in American mythology. The concept of American exceptionalism, which suggested that the United States had a unique role to play in world history, was reinforced by the successful expansion across the continent. As we reflect on Manifest Destiny today, it's important to recognize both its historical significance and its complex legacy. While it helped create the continental United States we know today, it also led to the displacement of native peoples and contributed to tensions that would eventually lead to civil war. Understanding this concept helps us better comprehend not only American history, but also current debates about American power and responsibility in the world. The effects of Manifest Destiny continue to influence American society and policy. From debates about immigration and border policies to discussions about America's role in promoting democracy globally, the echoes of this 19th century concept can still be heard. What lessons can we learn from this chapter of American history as we face contemporary challenges of expansion, power, and responsibility? Have you ever wondered how America transformed from a nation of farmers into the world's leading industrial power? The story of the Industrial Revolution in America is one of the most remarkable transformations in human history, fundamentally changing not just how people worked, but how they lived, traveled, and interacted with one another. The Industrial Revolution, which gained momentum in America during the mid-1800s, marked a decisive shift from manual labor and animal-based production to machine manufacturing. This wasn't just about replacing human hands with mechanical ones, it represented a complete reorganization of American society. Let's start with what triggered this massive change. The Civil War had actually accelerated industrialization, creating unprecedented demand for weapons, uniforms, and railroad equipment. After the war, these same factories and manufacturing techniques were repurposed for civilian goods. The availability of vast natural resources, particularly coal, iron ore, and oil, provided the raw materials needed for industrial growth. But what really made America's Industrial Revolution unique was its scale and speed. The railroad network played a crucial role in this transformation. By 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad connected the east and west coasts, creating a unified national market. Think about this. Before the railroad, it took months to cross the country. Afterward, it took just days. This transportation revolution allowed raw materials to reach factories and finished goods to reach consumers more efficiently than ever before. Steel became the backbone of American industrialization. The Bessemer process, introduced in the 1850s, allowed for the mass production of steel at significantly lower costs. Andrew Carnegie, who started as a telegraph operator, built an empire based on this innovation. His Carnegie Steel Company produced more steel than all of Britain by the 1890s. Have you ever considered how many modern buildings, bridges, and railroads wouldn't exist without this steel revolution? The rise of corporations marked another significant change. Prior to this era, most businesses were small and locally owned, but the demands of industrial production required larger organizations with more capital. The corporate structure, allowing companies to raise money by selling shares, became increasingly common. Names like John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil and Carnegie Steel became synonymous with American industrial might. Electricity transformed both industry and daily life. Thomas Edison's Pearl Street Station, opened in 1882, began providing electric power to New York City customers. This innovation sparked a revolution in manufacturing, as factories could now operate more efficiently with electric motors. Think about how different your life would be without electricity. This was the reality for Americans before the Industrial Revolution. The assembly line, perfected by Henry Ford in the early 1900s, revolutionized manufacturing. Ford's Model T production system reduced the time to build a car from 12 hours to just 2.5 hours. This innovation made automobiles affordable for average Americans and created a model for mass production that would be copied worldwide. However, industrialization wasn't without its challenges. Workers often faced dangerous conditions, long hours, and low wages. Child labor was common, with children as young as 5 working in factories and mines. The rise of labor unions came as a response to these conditions. The American Federation of Labor, founded in 1886, fought for better wages, shorter hours, and safer working conditions. Urbanization accelerated as people moved from farms to cities seeking factory jobs. In 1860, only 20% of Americans lived in urban areas. By 1900, that number had doubled. Cities grew rapidly, often struggling to provide adequate housing and services for their swelling populations. Immigration also played a crucial role. Between 1860 and 1900, more than 14 million immigrants arrived in America, providing the workforce needed for industrial expansion. Many came from Southern and Eastern Europe, changing the demographic makeup of American cities and contributing to the nation's cultural diversity. The Industrial Revolution also transformed American society in less visible ways. The rise of the middle class, the emergence of department stores, the spread of public education, and the growth of leisure activities all resulted from industrial wealth and new patterns of work and consumption. New technologies changed communication patterns. The telegraph, telephone, and mass circulation newspapers connected Americans in unprecedented ways. Consider how these innovations parallel today's digital revolution in terms of their impact on society and business. The Industrial Revolution's effects continue to shape our world today. The basic patterns of mass production, corporate organization, and urban life that emerged during this period remain fundamental to modern society. The questions it raised about the relationship between workers and employers, the role of government in the economy, and the balance between progress and environmental protection continue to resonate. What makes this period particularly fascinating is how it represents a complete transformation of American society in just a few generations. From an agricultural nation where most people lived on farms and produced goods by hand, America became the world's leading industrial power, setting patterns of production and consumption that would influence the entire world. The legacy of the Industrial Revolution raises important questions for our own time. How do we balance technological progress with human needs? What is the proper relationship between business and government? How do we ensure that economic growth benefits everyone? These questions, first raised during the Industrial Revolution, remain relevant as we face our own period of rapid technological change and economic transformation.